Welcome back to our last class together. At the heart of psychological transformation lies a profound mystery. How do conflicting aspects of ourselves give birth to new, more integrated consciousness? How does the tension between opposing forces within the psyche resolve, not through the victory of one side over the other, but through the emergence of something that transcends both while honoring each? In our previous video, we explored the tension of opposites as a fundamental dynamic in psychological life. How contrary forces create both the challenges we face and the energy that drives our development. Today, we'll examine what Jung called the transcendent function, the psychological process through which this tension resolves into higher order consciousness. This concept represents one of Jung's most profound contributions to understanding psychological growth, not merely a theoretical idea, but a practical description of how transformation actually occurs when we engage consciously with the opposing forces within our psyche. Jung formally defined the transcendent function as the psychological function that arises from the tension between consciousness and the unconscious and supports their union. This technical description points toward a dynamic process rather than a static concept, the actual mechanism through which psychological growth occurs. Developed early in Jung's career, but refined throughout his life, this concept emerged from his own experience of navigating the profound tensions between rational consciousness and the irrational unconscious, between scientific training and mystical insight, between personal identity and archetypal forces. Unlike religious or philosophical notions of transcendence that suggest rising above earthly concerns, Jung's transcendent function remains firmly grounded in psychological reality. It doesn't escape the opposites, but creates a new relationship between them, not eliminating tension, but transforming it into creative energy for further development. The function operates primarily at the boundary between conscious and unconscious, mediating between known and unknown aspects of the psyche. It represents neither conscious control nor unconscious possession, but a third position that allows relationship between these opposing forces without being identified exclusively with either. This mediating function forms the core mechanism of individuation, the process of becoming more fully yourself by integrating previously unconscious aspects of the personality. Each step in this lifelong journey involves some version of the transcendent function as new material emerges from the unconscious and gradually enters into relationship with conscious identity. How does this transcendent process actually work? What are the psychological mechanics that allow opposing forces to generate new consciousness rather than merely canceling each other out or continuing in endless conflict? The essential condition involves holding the tension between opposites without identifying exclusively with either side. When we collapse this tension by choosing one position and rejecting the other, we forfeit the potential for transcendence. The energy necessary for transformation comes precisely from maintaining conscious relationship with contrary forces simultaneously. From this sustained tension emerges what Jung sometimes called the third thing. Not a compromise between opposing positions, but something genuinely new that contains elements of both while transcending their opposition. This third element doesn't eliminate the original polarities, but creates a new relationship between them, a larger context that gives each its appropriate place. The nature of this emergence remains somewhat mysterious and unpredictable. It cannot be manufactured through intellectual effort alone, but requires engaging the full psyche, conscious and unconscious, rational and irrational, individual and collective. The transcendent element appears not through forcing, but through receptivity to what wants to emerge naturally from the tension. This is why genuine psychological growth can't be programmed or controlled completely. We can create conditions that support the transcendent function, but the actual emergence of new consciousness follows its own timing and form, often surprising us with solutions we couldn't have consciously devised. Symbols play a crucial role in the transcendent function, serving as natural mediators between opposing psychological forces. Unlike signs, which represent something known, true symbols embody multiple meanings simultaneously, including elements that remain partially unconscious or mysterious. Effective psychological symbols unite rational and irrational, conscious and unconscious, personal and collective dimensions in a single image or experience. They speak to multiple levels of the psyche simultaneously, creating bridges between aspects of ourselves that logical thought alone cannot connect. Dream symbols often represent the psyche's natural attempt to mediate between opposing forces. When we dream of hybrid creatures, paradoxical situations, or impossible objects, these frequently embody tension seeking resolution in our waking life. The bizarre or irrational quality of dream imagery reflects precisely its function of connecting rational consciousness with irrational unconscious material. Religious and cultural symbols similarly contain and express psychological oppositions. The cross unites vertical and horizontal dimensions, symbolizing the intersection of divine and human. The Taoist yin-yang embodies the dynamic interplay of complementary opposites. Mythological figures often combine contrary qualities, strength and vulnerability, wisdom and foolishness, divine and human attributes. In psychological development, personal symbols often emerge that uniquely express our individual process of integration. These might appear in dreams, creative work, or spontaneous imagery during times of transformation. Their power comes not from intellectual understanding, but from their ability to connect multiple dimensions of experience in a single resonant form. Jung developed active imagination as a practical method for engaging the transcendent function. This structured approach to inner dialogue creates conditions where conscious and unconscious, known and unknown aspects of the psyche can meet in creative exchange. The basic process involves step 1, quieting the analytical mind and entering a receptive state between waking and dreaming consciousness. Step 2, focusing on a specific image, mood, or inner figure, often one that carries emotional charge or appears in dreams. Step 3, engaging this content as if it were an autonomous entity, allowing it to respond in its own voice rather than scripting its responses. Step 4, maintaining both participation and observation throughout, engaging genuinely while remaining aware of the process. Step 5, documenting the experience through writing, drawing, movement, or other forms of expression. Step 6, reflecting on insights or shifts that emerge from the dialogue. This practice facilitates the transcendent function by creating space for genuine exchange between opposing aspects of the psyche. Rather than conscious identity attempting to control or eliminate unconscious material, active imagination establishes a relationship where both can contribute their unique perspective and energy. The dialogical nature of this process proves particularly important. True transcendence doesn't come from merely thinking about psychological opposites, but from experiencing their interaction, allowing them to respond to each other in ways that often surprise or challenge our conscious expectations. Beyond formal active imagination, many forms of creative expression naturally engage the transcendent function. Artistic creation often emerges precisely from the tension between opposing forces, structure and spontaneity, tradition and innovation, personal and universal, conscious craft and unconscious inspiration. Different creative forms engage different aspects of this process. Visual arts often unite rational form with irrational color and texture, conscious design with unconscious emergence, creating unified images that contain and express psychological oppositions. Music brings together mathematical structure and emotional expression, intellectual composition and bodily rhythm, creating experiences that engage multiple levels of consciousness simultaneously. Movement and dance unite mind and body, intention and instinct, form and energy in ways that often bypass intellectual barriers to integration. Writing, especially poetry and fiction, creates containers where logical narrative and symbolic imagery, conscious theme and unconscious association can coexist and interrelate. These creative channels prove especially valuable because the transcendent function operates partly through nonverbal, non-rational dimensions of experience. Some oppositions cannot be resolved through logical thought alone, but require symbolic, embodied, or imaginal approaches to integration. The transcendent function doesn't operate only in formal psychological work or creative endeavors, but appears throughout everyday life, often in moments we might not immediately recognize as transformative. Relationship conflicts frequently provide opportunities for transcendence. When we can hold both our perspective and another's simultaneously, not dismissing either but seeking the larger truth that encompasses both, we often discover solutions that neither party could have reached alone. The third thing that emerges isn't mere compromise, but a new understanding that honors valid aspects of opposing positions. Professional and creative challenges similarly invoke the transcendent function. The designer facing contradictory requirements, the leader balancing competing priorities, the parent addressing opposing needs. All these situations create tension that, when consciously engaged, can generate innovative solutions beyond conventional either-or thinking. Life transitions almost always involve the tension of opposites, holding both what has been and what might be, security and risk, known identity and unknown potential. The anxiety these transitions create often reflects precisely the energy of transformation, seeking expression through the transcendent function. Practical approaches for supporting these natural transcendent processes include journaling dialogues between opposing perspectives within yourself, noticing physical sensations that accompany psychological tension, creating artistic expressions of conflicted situations, sharing opposing views with trusted others who can help hold the tension, developing comfort with not knowing while questions remain unresolved. These practices don't force transcendence, but create conditions where it can emerge naturally in its own timing and form. As we conclude our exploration of Jung's psychology, the transcendent function helps us understand how all these concepts work together as aspects of a unified approach to psychological development. Archetypes represent universal patterns that often appear in opposing pairs: mother and father, hero and shadow, wise elder and divine child. The tension between these archetypal energies creates the conditions for individual consciousness to develop through the transcendent function. Shadow work involves precisely this transcendent process, not eliminating rejective aspects of ourselves, but establishing a new relationship with them, allowing both conscious identity and shadow material to contribute to a more complete expression of who we are. The anima and animus, the contrasexual aspects of the psyche, similarly engage the transcendent function through their dialogue with conscious gender identity, creating the possibility for psychological wholeness beyond limited gender stereotypes. Dreams naturally employ the transcendent function through their integration of conscious concerns and unconscious compensations, rational narratives and irrational imagery, personal situations and collective patterns. Synchronicity, meaningful coincidence between inner and outer events, represents the transcendent function operating at the boundary between psyche and matter, subjective and objective, meaning and causality. Even complexes, those troublesome emotional knots in the psyche, contain the seeds of transcendence when approached as valuable communication from neglected aspects of ourselves, rather than mere problems to eliminate. Throughout all of these dimensions of psychological life, the transcendent function operates as the integrative process through which opposing forces generate new consciousness. It represents not a single achievement, but an ongoing dynamic that continues throughout the individuation journey, each resolution creating the conditions for new tensions and further development. As we complete our journey through Jung's psychological vision, the transcendent function reminds us that psychological development isn't a linear path to a fixed destination, but a continuing spiral of growth, each turn bringing new challenges, new oppositions, and new opportunities for integration. Jung's psychology doesn't promise permanent resolution of life's tensions, but offers approaches for engaging them consciously and creatively, transforming what might be merely conflicted or painful into sources of meaning, vitality, and authentic selfhood. The concepts we've explored, the structures of psyche, archetypes and complexes, shadow integration, dream analysis, synchronicity, and now the transcendent function, together create a comprehensive approach to psychological life that honors both its challenges and its profound creative potential. I invite you to continue exploring these ideas not merely as intellectual concepts, but as living realities in your own experience, noticing the oppositions that create both tension and energy in your life, the symbols that emerge from your dreams and imagination, the meaningful coincidences that connect inner and outer experience, and the moments of transcendence where new understanding emerges from sustainable psychological tension. Remember that the goal isn't psychological perfection, but greater wholeness, not eliminating life's contradictions, but engaging them consciously, allowing them to generate the energy and direction for your continuing individuation journey. Thank you for joining me for this exploration of Jung's remarkable vision of the human psyche. May it support your own path toward greater authenticity, creativity, and meaningful engagement with both the heights and depths of psychological experience. See you in the community. Take care and be well.